Hi, folks. Thanks for joining today. We'll be starting in about a minute or two, just to give people more time to log in. Just gonna give it a few more seconds to get going. All right. Well, hello, everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar. Today, we're going to be talking about shifting transportation, a bit about what you need to know on how we can shift the transportation system, as well as some of the tools that are available to help you in your work making decisions and understanding what changes we need to make. Next slide. So we're going to start today with a quick introduction before I pass over to my colleague, Stephen Nemoli, who's going to cover the transportation system in more detail. We're then going to pass over to Leo Vigna for a quick demo on Climate Watch, and then myself for a quick demo of the Systems Change Lab before tossing it over to Q&A. Next slide. So tell you a bit about Climate Watch. Climate Watch is an online platform designed to empower policymakers, researchers, media, and other stakeholders with open climate data, visualizations, and resources to gather insights on national and global progress on climate change. It brings together dozens of data sets using several modules that help unpack, understand, and even compare countries' nationally determined contributions under the Paris Agreement. It lets you access historical emissions data, use models to map pathways to a low carbon future, and a lot more as well. Next slide. And so this free platform provides actionable analysis on how countries can enhance their efforts to combat climate change, where they are now in terms of emissions, and how far they have to go. Next slide will give you a bit of a sense of just all the data that's available on Climate Watch, which Leo will dive into a bit later. If you can go to the next slide. This slide is just, the data slide on everything that we have on Climate Watch. There's a lot going on there. In terms of what Systems Change Lab is, Systems Change Lab is a platform that's designed to help us monitor, learn from, and mobilize action towards transformational shifts needed to protect both people and planet. There's a lot going on in Systems Change Lab in both monitoring change, helping us learn and share with each other about what we can do and what's happening, as well as finding ways to take action. And so the data platform that we're going to cover today is only a small part of that monitoring pillar of our work. But that monitoring part is really important because it helps us identify and track some of the key shifts in our global systems that we can achieve and use to really make sure that we're able to tackle climate change and also tackle our emissions profiles. Next slide. So just to give a sense of the scope of Systems Change Lab, we currently plan to cover 14 different systems on the platform. 5 of these are now live: power, industry, transport, carbon removal, and finance. And of course, we're covering transport today in much more detail. But we have a lot of others that are going to be coming later on this year that we're really looking forward to. If we go to the next slide, every system is comprised of a series of shifts, what we call shifts, these kind of transformational changes that we need to see in order to have a sustainable future. Across the entire Systems Change Lab, we have about 70 different shifts across all systems. Transport has about 5. And then within each shift, we have a series of indicators that we break out between targets and enablers and barriers. So targets, if we go to the next slide, focus primarily on whether or not we are making progress towards some of the key things that need to occur in order for us to see change happen. We try to measure this and give an assessment of whether or not progress is moving in the right direction and we're actually on track to achieving change. We look at whether or not we are heading in the right direction, but at a promising pace, still off track from where we need to be, or if it's the right direction, but very much well off track. As well, we also look into where we're seeing targets going in the wrong direction, or even where don't we have enough data to fully assess or calculate that. With enablers and barriers, if we go to the next slide, really what we're trying to cover here is what are some of the key actions and things that we can do that will actually enable some of this change. This kind of has a ton of different categories that span from innovations in tech to regulations and incentives, strong institutions from policymakers, leadership from change agents like companies and corporations, as well as just general behavior change. We'll cover all of this a lot more in depth, but for now, I'm going to pass it over to Stephen to dive into the shifts needed to transform our global transport system. Stephen, take it away.
Great, thanks, Tappan. Hi, everyone. I'm Stephen Nemoli, and thanks for joining us today. So when we refer to the transport system, we're talking about all of the ways that we move people and goods around the world. It encompasses all modes of travel from walking and cycling to long-range trucking to aviation and marine shipping and everything in between. Next slide, please. In 2019, transport contributed about 15% of global greenhouse gas emissions. In the same year, 71% of those transportation-related emissions came from roadways alone. This includes emissions from cars, from buses, from trucks. And for this reason, and because of the popularity and the salience of road transport, electrifying these cars, buses, and trucks is often seen as the primary shift needed to decarbonize and transform our transport system. And this is an important piece of the puzzle. But really, there's also so much more that needs to change across this system. To transform the system to one that is zero carbon, clean, healthy, and safe, the world really must undertake 5 major shifts. Guarantee reliable access to safe and modern mobility, reduce avoidable vehicle and air travel, shift to public, shared, and non-motorized transport, transition to zero carbon cars and trucks, and finally, transition to zero carbon shipping and aviation. Within these 5 shifts, Systems Change Lab has identified 13 target indicators to track progress in actualizing these crucial changes to our transport system. Like Tappan said, those are these outcomes or types of indicators that can really identify, where are we seeing progress across these different areas. These targets are aligned with the Paris Climate Agreement's aim to keep warming below 1.5 degrees Celsius, or are rooted in United Nations Sustainable Development Goals or other key global equity goals. Of these 13 targets, 9 are moving in the right direction, although below the necessary speed and scale. Of the remaining 4, 1 is continuing in the wrong direction, and the others lack the publicly available data needed to be evaluated by our team. We've also identified 24 enablers and barriers to change, which aim to highlight the underlying conditions that enable change and these barriers that could impede progress. These are especially useful in shifts like transitioning to zero carbon shipping and aviation, where we're seeing progress in the development of technologies, but they're really still in these very early stages and they have not quite reached the market yet, at least at the scale that we really need. We'll learn more about these indicators and how you can use them in Tappan's platform demonstration later on. But for now, let's dive into some key insights into the current state of progress in shifting the transport system. Guaranteeing reliable access to safe and modern mobility is a key piece of the transition to a more sustainable and equitable transport system. While we work to decarbonize the system through other shifts, we must also expand access and ensure that we're creating a safe, modern system that is centered around improving health. Some of this comes in tandem with other shifts. For example, expanding public transit infrastructure to include designated walking and biking lanes will not only reduce road congestion and emissions from cars, but will encourage physical activity, decrease air pollution in urban areas, and also provide more access to mobility, not just access to cars. Alongside improving transport, a key part of this shift is increasing access. Only 52% of the global population has access to safe and convenient public transit, and this access is not equitably distributed. Transportation disadvantaged neighborhoods are found across the globe and create barriers keeping people from jobs, stores with fresh produce, and other basic needs. In many places, this lack of safe or affordable access to public transit creates a reliance on lower capacity, higher carbon modes of travel, including, especially, fossil fuel powered cars or 2- and 3-wheelers. That includes things like motorcycles, auto rickshaws, things like that. And this not only means more greenhouse gases, but more air pollution as well, particularly from diesel exhaust. Progress in expanding access to safe and affordable public transportation has really stalled in recent years, with access at its lowest, particularly across Africa and West and Central Asia. While guaranteeing equal access is an essential part of this shift, creating safer modes of travel is equally important. About 17 out of every 100,000 people in the world were killed on roadways in 2019, and nearly half of those were pedestrians or cyclists. With concerted efforts to protect pedestrians, cyclists, and drivers alike, such as improving street designs, creating protected bicycle lanes, and enforcing traffic laws, we could save 641,000 lives annually. However, we're well off track to reach this goal by 2030, and doing so would require us to ramp up recent progress by 10 times its current rate. These traffic deaths stem from a system that relies primarily on individual cars, and this system also leads to congested cities, inequitable access to goods, to services, to jobs. A shift to modern and safe mobility must also mean a shift away from this model. This is also crucial to meeting Paris-aligned climate targets, as electrifying our vehicle fleet alone cannot happen quickly or effectively enough to limit warming below 1.5 degrees Celsius, especially given the additional electricity that would be needed to power such a fleet. So to transform our transport system, we need to shift away from avoidable vehicle and air travel when possible. Recent trends show that passenger kilometers traveled by cars are actually increasing, especially in high-income, car-dependent places like Europe and North America. There are a few potential steps to reverse this trend, including things like high-density development in urban areas, ensuring that jobs, food, healthcare, and other basic needs can all be found in walking or bicycling distance. But in doing so, we must ensure that these areas are accessible and affordable. As high-density areas like these can sometimes be expensive to live in, we'll also need to ensure safe and equitable access to high-quality and safe public transport, either by rail or by bus. Improving our high-speed rail systems won't only mitigate these kilometers traveled by cars. About 15% of regional flights could be served by existing high-speed rail. And these systems are expanding, especially in developing and emerging economies. These nations have an opportunity to grow their economies with rail, investing early and reaping the benefits of a clean, efficient, and affordable means of transport for both people and freight. We've seen China emerge as a leader in this industry. But it's not only regional travel we need to replace with rail, but also transforming modes of local travel. Shifting to public, shared, and non-motorized transit at every opportunity will be crucial in creating a better transportation system. And the good news is that rapid transit in cities is growing. Since 2015, over half of the top 50 emitting cities have grown their transit infrastructure. Recent progress still needs to accelerate by about 6 times its current rate to meet the 2030 target. You can see it in this graphic that our current rate wouldn't even get us to 2/3 of the 2030 goal. But in other good news, that there is economic incentive to expanding transit systems, from actual monetary gains to jobs created. But we need to shift to other forms of non-motorized transport as well. Cycling is one of the most effective ways to reduce emissions in the system, as it emits no greenhouse gases at all to bike from point A to point B. What it does require, though, is safe, high-quality bike lanes and campaigns or incentives to ensure that people use them. There are many success stories in creating the necessary infrastructure and cultural shifts to increase cycling. Cities looking to expand cycling infrastructure can follow the example of Sevilla, Spain, where the local government expanded cycling infrastructure from 12 kilometers of unconnected cycle paths in 2005 to 120 kilometers of protected bike lanes in 2010. The expansion was coupled with a bike sharing system, which helped boost the number of daily bike trips 5-fold over 3 years. And of course, a crucial piece of the transformation of our transport system is the shift to zero carbon cars and trucks, where this travel can't be replaced with public and non-motorized transit. Fortunately, electric vehicles provide a similar service to fossil fuel powered vehicles without directly emitting carbon dioxide or air pollution from the exhaust pipe. While the uptake numbers of these vehicles are surging, we still need to see more progress. Electric cars have seen a lot of growth over the past several years, and there have been several cost, policy, and leadership milestones along the way. First, accessible passenger EVs were launched in 2008, the Tesla Roadster, followed by the Chevrolet Volt and the Nissan Leaf in 2010. By 2013, the cost of lithium-ion batteries was half what it was in 2008. And since 2010 to now, we've actually seen about an 80 to 90% decrease in these costs. It's mind-boggling to see the amount of progress we've seen in lithium-ion battery cost declines. The Paris Agreement was signed in 2015, and it spawned the Zero Emission Vehicle Alliance, made up of several countries and subnational governments committed to accelerating the uptake of EVs. Although we've seen some countries making commitments to transition to all vehicle sales, France became the first country to sign a 2040 phase out of fossil fuel powered cars into law in 2019. And in 2020, it became cheaper to own an electric car in the US and in major European markets than a comparable fossil fuel powered one. These events have all coincided with major growth in the sales of EVs. And there's even more recent data than we have here showing that 1 in 7 cars sold in 2022 were electric. We're also seeing huge progress in the transition to electric buses. Government ownership of many bus fleets can make them low-hanging fruit in this respect, because an administration can make decisions about large fleets with predictable schedules that will look different than the decisions that an individual car owner is going to make. This is particularly the case in China, where 97% of electric bus sales occurred in 2019. This rapid increase in bus sales, primarily from China, puts this indicator within reach of its 2030 target, while cars and trucks are still farther away. Ensuring electric vehicles are affordable and increasing their production is key. Medium and heavy-duty trucks are more difficult to decarbonize, though, as these technologies haven't quite reached commercial maturity, and the technologies, the requirements for moving these heavy-duty trucks are different than the ones for cars. They require different energy density. They have different obstacles that sometimes batteries have more trouble delivering. And we might actually see other options, including hydrogen. And so this will require more manufacturers offering things like hydrogen and electric options, more countries setting targets to phase out gas-powered vehicles, and more places building out charging infrastructure. Decarbonizing cars, buses, and trucks also all require rapidly improving our charging infrastructure, and this is key, ensuring that it is powered by clean energy. The first handful of shifts in the system require a cultural and behavioral shifts in how we move around. To decarbonize aviation and shipping, we'll really need science on our side as well, as these zero carbon technologies are still in their infancy. Emissions from aviation, as well as many other sectors, are really unevenly distributed across the globe. In fact, 23% of aviation emissions come from flights departing in the United States, and 60% from just the top 10 departing countries. It's clear that really in thinking about decarbonizing this sector, there's a lot of responsibility that falls particularly on these top 10 countries. The good news is that zero emission options are emerging, including sustainable aviation fuels made from green hydrogen and captured carbon dioxide, or in some cases, sustainably sourced biomass. These biomass-derived sustainable aviation fuels are really the only zero emission solution commercially available in 2022, but new demonstrations of zero emission planes are increasing. We're seeing increasing commitments from manufacturers that are interested in hydrogen planes, in electric planes, particularly for short distances, things like that. When it comes to these biomass-derived fuels, it's really important that our fuels are not developed from these unsustainable biomass sources, such as food crops, which could create food shortages, harm biodiversity, prevent carbon sequestration, and really change the incentives for land use for the agricultural sector. Generally, a massive scaling up of investment and policy in shipping and aviation is needed. A lot like aviation, zero carbon marine shipping is quite nascent. But despite sort of the disheartening story told by this chart, there is progress in this indicator. Zero emission fuels for shipping are being developed, include things like synthetic carbon-based fuels made from green hydrogen and captured carbon dioxide, as well as the use of green hydrogen and particularly green ammonia in fuel cells. Excitingly, there really are already signs of demand for these fuels. 63 companies have already signed deals to procure zero emission ships. Of course, we need to scale up investment and development to get these fuels and ships on the market as soon as possible. Together, these 5 shifts can transform our global transportation system. They offer a new system where opportunities and services are easily and equitably accessed through clean, safe mobility, from walking to electric buses to bike share programs. A system where planes run on clean fuel and road crashes are not the leading cause of death in children. A system where high-speed trains are prevalent and popular. For more in-depth information on this research, we have a few really, I think, valuable resources, including the State of Climate Action 2022 report. We have a wealth of additional data available on the Systems Change Lab and on Climate Watch. But for now, I'm going to pass it off to Tappan to show you how to find more insights on these indicators using the Systems Change Lab platform.
Great, thanks. Excuse me. Great, thanks so much, Stephen. Really great presentation there. So yeah, I'm going to take over the screen share and give you all a quick demo on Systems Change Lab. So am I sharing the right screen? Let me double check this. Okay, I think we're good to go. So yeah, so this is the Systems Change Lab platform that Stephen was talking about. This is our key data platform that shows basically everything that Stephen was talking about, all the data points that you saw there, and quite a lot more. So Systems Change Lab, we have, as mentioned earlier, 5 systems currently available on the site. A lot of data that you can dive into. and a lot more on not just transport, but also on all the different things that we need to do to really change and make the world a better place. You can learn more about all the different shifts that we have for each of the different systems on our shifts page. This is available from the homepage, but also under research and shifts here. And you can see all sorts of different stuff that we currently have available, as well as what's going to be coming down the pipeline for each of these different systems. The other shifts available here are still in draft, and so still subject to some changes as well. So we would love to hear your feedback if you're thinking that there are other things here that we should be covering. But if we're going to dive in, let's dive in with the transport system. So if you click into any of the system pages, you'll be taken to a page that dives into more depth on what the system is, what's going on, and really what you need to know about what's happening and all the progress going on here. At the very top of every system page, there's a brief section on highlights. And so here we're just trying to show what are some of the key things to know and understand for that system to understand where it's headed, what are some of the big changes happening, as well as the key shifts on the right-hand side that we're monitoring. Below that, we also have just a quick summary of all of the data available for that shift. So this includes the targets of progress that we've mentioned, the enablers and barriers, and then how many of them are moving in the right direction or are off track. And you can always hover over these to get a quick sense of what we're monitoring, what we're scanning. Below that, we have a quick summary that goes into some depth on what's happening with that system, for, in this case, transport, some charts to show you a bit more on that, and giving you a sense of where we're headed, what are the potential future opportunities for change. Further down, we have just a brief overview of each of the shifts. And this will just give you a sense of what's going on with each of these shifts, what we talk about here. Basically, a really high-level summary of what Stephen has just talked about. If we click into one of these shifts, say transition to zero carbon cars and trucks, you'll be greeted with a very similar structure to the previous page, where we have a series of highlights at the top, the other shifts in the system on the right-hand side, and then a brief summary of the targets for that particular shift down below. Further down, you again get a quick summary of everything happening with that shift, what's important, why it matters, and where we're seeing progress and what signs of change we're seeing. But then below that, we really start to get into a lot of the data that we've been talking about. So here you can get a quick hit assessment of why we're saying something might be off track, but heading in a promising direction, versus well off track and not stagnating in many ways. As well, you might be able to see for some indicators where we cannot calculate, we do still have data. You're able to see what that data looks like, whether it's just a single data point, a series of data without a target, or just not enough data to really make an assessment of if it's on track or off track yet. But then further down, you can also get into the enablers and barriers that we're really looking at to understand where change might occur. And so here you start to get into those really key actions and enablers that we can see from different actors that might make change here. This includes regulations and incentives, leadership, innovation, all sorts of different things. Further down, we start to really get into what I like to call the plant-based meat of the platform, where we have these really robust summaries of what each of these indicators are, what's happening, what's been occurring, providing you with a lot more information on what you need to know for each individual indicator, and then really getting into the data for each one. On each of these charts, you can scan over and hover to see how the data has been changing. You can see what the 2030 target is, as well as if there's a future target, either 2035, 2040, 2050, what those targets are. You can also get a sense of if we're assessing whether or not change is going to be exponential, if it's not going to be exponential, whether or not that's likely, as well as the acceleration factor needed to actually reach the target that we're seeing here. We also, of course, always are providing you the source of where that data is coming from. There's a little eye up here that you can click to get a lot more information on the source, and you can actually use this to go visit those sources and learn more about the indicator itself if you're interested in that, or the methodology. There's also an option here to actually download this chart if you want to use it for a PowerPoint or something like that, or share a link to the page as well to that specific indicator. Some charts also include a few different views. Most of our timeline charts always include a yearly change view that gives you a sense of year-over-year change, how quickly it's changing. You can see that from 2020 to 2021, there was a really big jump in the share of electric vehicles and light-duty vehicle sales. And we provide similar breakdowns for most of our indicators here. You can see that we're seeing less of a jump here on in the light-duty vehicle fleet. But some of our indicators, as mentioned, don't always have data, but we do always try to have a write-up for those indicators. So if you jump into any of those, you'll see that there's a long write-up. You'll see that we don't necessarily have data on the timeline, but we do still provide more data on either why there's a data challenge or where we're learning more or what we're trying to figure out here. For other indicators, and this is the one I think that might be most interesting here as well, for something, say, like public charging stations as an enabler, we do provide further breakdowns where we have that kind of data. So in this instance, if we're looking at public charging stations, we don't have a target for this because it's an enabler, and we don't necessarily know what that target would need to be. But we do know, we have enough data to be able to say whether or not this is changing and moving rapidly. As we can see here, there's been a lot of progress with charging stations over the past 10 years. But we also try to provide disaggregate views as well, so that you can see by technologies what's going on and what's happening with each of these indicators. For instance, this shows that publicly available fast charging has not been growing as quickly as publicly available slow charging. The other thing we offer here, though, is country level views. So if you jump to a map view, you're able to see a bit more details on where things have been growing, in particular, what changes we're seeing and where. And there's even a time slider to give you a sense of how things have changed. And so you can see here the growth in chargers around the world, especially in China over just the past few years. And so if we were to jump back to the disaggregate view and go down to China, we could see that they've been driving a lot of that growth in public charging. But as well, if we jump to, say, the United States, we can see that the US has also been growing quite quickly, but mostly with available slow charging when compared to China's charging infrastructure. So this is one of those kind of leading indicators that we show that can give you a sense of where, say, electric vehicles are heading, where we're seeing progress and major changes before we actually see changes in the other data start to hit. So this is kind of the structure that you would see on pretty much every page that we have. Again, where we have it, we try to provide disaggregated view and country level view, so you can jump into all of that. This is, again, available for these 5 shifts currently. We also have a really robust data dashboard as well that will allow you to explore the data pretty deeply. One of the views on this data dashboard is our pinwheel that you've seen on the homepage. This is just meant to provide a quick overview of everything that's happening, where we're seeing progress, where we're not, giving you that really high-level sense of which systems need the most help and which shifts need the most help. Or where are we seeing a lot of progress. You can click into this pinwheel to get an expanded view of everything that's going on, everything that's happening, as well as just clicking around to get a sense of what all the indicators are, and even getting these small charts here. And of course, you're always able to click these and explore on the shift page itself. The other view we have here, and this is my favorite view that we have on the platform, is the grid view. What the grid view allows you to do is basically see all of the data we have available in one place. So this view here lets you see all of the 72 targets that we have on the platform. And you can scroll through and see we've got a lot of data here, and also a lot of data gaps that we're still trying to fill. But then we also have the option to switch over to the enablers and barriers. And we have, I think, 167 enablers and barriers available on the platform. And you can see, again, there's a lot going on here that you can really dive into and explore. But what I think makes this view really powerful is it allows you to filter down so that you're not just staring at an overwhelming amount of data, but really start to get into the data points that you are most interested in finding. So say if you're just interested in seeing more on innovation, you're able to filter down to just those indicators that are relevant for innovation. And if you want to take finance out of the equation, you can see just those that are relevant for power, industry, transport, and carbon removal for those enablers and barriers. Where do we need to see more innovation and more changes in our technologies? Other options might include, though, that maybe you're looking for indicators that specifically relate to corporate action. So if you wanted to, you could start typing in your term up here, say corporation, and see which in particular relate to what corporations need to do. For targets, there's not as many on this, just because corporate action isn't always necessarily the target of what we're trying to do. But there's a lot more here on that for enablers and barriers. And then, of course, you can always look for corporations, or maybe you're looking for what companies can do as well. And you can get a sense here for all the data we have available on that. And that's just with 5 systems, with much more to come. Other things I'll quickly point out on the platform that we have available. So we have this data dashboard here. We have all of our research, of course, available. So if you want to read a little more about systems change, see the other shifts that are coming, read in about our publications that we have, like the State of Climate Action Report, or other reports we've produced, we have those available here. If you want to read more about our methodology and how we chose different indicators, that's also available. We also have an option to download data. And this actually, we try to make all of our data available for you for free. So there's even an option here just to download everything that we have available right from the get-go, and it just gives you a giant zip file that you can sort through. But you can also sort through to find specific data that you're looking for within specific systems or shifts and all of that as well. We also provide, news and events every once in a while, including webinars like this one, as well as our About page, where we tell you a little more about who we are and answer any frequently asked questions. And of course, we encourage folks to subscribe to our newsletter whenever possible. But that's really Systems Change Lab. Definitely happy to answer more questions at the end on this. But I'm going to pass it now to Leo to talk about Climate Watch.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tapan. Now it's my turn to share a screen. So hold on just for a second. And here we are. So this is the homepage for our Climate Watch here on climatewatchdata.org. And the idea for today's quick demo of this platform is to show you how you can find out more information on transportation, which is the topic we're covering, into countries' climate commitments. Tapan mentioned at the beginning, what is the data that Climate Watch is covering? So what we do have, it's the bulk of our information, it's on climate commitments. And by those, we mean the nationally determined contributions, which is the main document that countries are bringing to the UNFCCC, which is this UN entity working towards the Paris Agreement. But we also cover long-term strategies and net zero targets. Today, I'll just focus on how transportation, it's been taken into account for nationally determined contributions, or NDC for short. And then I'm also going to be quickly covering the other part that we have on Climate Watch, which relates to greenhouse gas emissions inventories. So getting started, and also flagging that this is just a tiny little bit of what we have on Climate Watch, which is a massive platform. But for today, it's going to focus here on commitments. Here on the top bar menu, we can go to the Explore NDC section. Now, what we have done in this module in particular, as you can see here, if I scroll down a little bit, you'll see that there's this map with tons of indicators and different drop-down boxes. So here what we show, for example, by default, you see here what are the UNFCCC processes. Basically here, it's just letting you know what are the countries that brought up a new commitment, a new NDC to the UN in the latest cycle. You can split the information and filter it by documents. You can have, by default, all the documents that we have, or you can select by the first NDC, second NDC, and so on. you can then select by different categories. So by default, we have this UNFCCC process, but really depending on what you're working on, you can focus on loss and damage mitigation. Today, I'm actually going to be making a special focus on sectoral mitigation measures. And so from here, we see it already changes the map. From the categories, that we have several indicators grouped underneath. Here we have agriculture, buildings, economy-wide, energy, and we get to transport, which is today's topic. So what is this map showing here? Basically, in yellow, it shows that 135 parties have a sectoral measure specified onto their NDCs. If we hover over different countries, we can quickly see how these sectoral measures are specified and what they relate to. We can also see how many parties are not specifying any measure, and we can also see what's the share of global emissions that those countries represent. We could also be working at a more regional level. So this module allows you to filter these further down. So by default, we have world, but maybe we're just working on Latin America. So you can select here, and we see that it only highlights the countries within the region selected. And now we can see that the majority of countries within Latin America include a sectoral measure. Also, every time on Climate Watch, where you're going to see a map, you can scroll down and you will see a table view. So from here, it's basically some of the same information visualized here, but just in a different format. And the cool thing about this other table is that you can change it and sort it out. For example, if you're interested to see what are the latest countries that submitted an NDC that has a transportation sectoral measure. Now, all this information, it's also available for download. So if you go to this button here, download data, you have the image, or even go to the data explorer. Now, if you want to start diving deeper into transportation, we saw that it is one of the indicators here. Just going to select the region to have the world, but we can go one step further, clicking this arrow. And then from transportation, we can see all these other topics on aviation, right, regulations, interurban transport. There were several things that Stephen mentioned, for example, the importance of getting more rails, railroads developing in different countries, or for example, urban transportation. Now we can see this topic, even though a lot of countries mention transportation, it's only a fraction of them that also mentions urban transport. We can see it's only 24. So in addition of just knowing what country it's mentioning this topic, you can click on any of them. In this case, we can just go to Mexico, where it says that there's a sectoral measure specified. When we click on a country, it takes us to the NDC page. So from here, you get a summary of the NDC. But now we're just interested into these sectoral mitigation that they had. So we go over these 4 different tabs. We have all the indicators divided into overview, mitigation, adaptation, and sectoral information. This one relates to sectoral information. So we go to sectoral mitigation plans. We can see the breakdown of every single plan that they mentioned. We scroll down to transport, and then we see the one that we're interested in. So transport, urban transport, and we see the exact language from the NDCs, where it says that they want to prioritize and expand public space for pedestrians, and also consider more efficient public transport and alternatives to non-motorized transport systems. This is one way to find out what each country is doing and also to see them in aggregate. But if I go back here and I go to the category again, so sectoral mitigation measures, once again, I click on transport, and I see that it's not the exact same thing that I'm looking for. Stephen, for example, mentioned these interesting graphics on how much faster the share of EV vehicles, electric vehicles, needs to increase in order to reach this 1.5 goal of the Paris Agreement. So if you don't find this specific indicator because it's too niche or it's something that's not comprehended within the indicators we have, I want to highlight this other feature that we have, which is what I usually call the Google for NDCs. So in here, if you type, for example, electric vehicle, and you put it within quotation marks, that's going to take you to this NDC search page. And now you can see how many documents, so how many NDCs in the world are represented or include the electric vehicle word into their documents. So you can scroll down here, and then if you click on any one of these countries, you'll be able to find what they actually mentioned through that. Sometimes the word may come up into the NDC, but it doesn't mean that they're actually doing anything. Let me just add one more. How to prepare. So it might change because it's a specific word. So whenever you do a research, I would suggest that you include several different ways of referring to that. EVs, for example, could be another one. So here, let's say I'm working in Sub-Saharan Africa or in a region in particular. I can just scroll down and go. If I'm interested in, let's say, what could be here? South Africa. We can click there, and then the platform, it's already highlighting in the document how this topic it's been mentioned. So we give you a little bit of context on how that appears. So variable speed drives and efficient motors, we see here. This sounds like a policy they may have. So you can click there, and it will take us automatically to how that's been considered within the country's NDC. So this is a nice way to compare where the world stands by looking at the System Change Lab indicators, how much faster we should move into that direction, and then to also contrast that information with what countries are bringing forward into their NDCs. So that's how you can quickly check all this transportation information in NDCs. Now, the other part of Climate Watch that I want to show you, it's related to greenhouse gas emissions. So very quickly, going here to the GHG emissions module, we have developed the Climate Watch GHG inventory data, which is one of the most comprehensive that exists, that really allows you to compare side by side between all countries on a sectoral level information and also by gases. So here, and I had a couple already loaded here, we do have within sectors and subsectors, let's say we're focusing on the world, and we want to know what are different subsector emissions. By default, the information appears by countries, but you can split it by sector here. And if I hover over the map, I see that I have energy, agriculture, industrial processes, land use, and waste. And I don't see transportation here. So the good thing about Climate Watch data is that we do have subsector data for energy. So one thing I can do, first, I'll deselect the total, and I'm just gonna select all different subsectors. On energy, I'm gonna go again to this arrow and select all the different ones we have here. Select this one because it's overlaps with transportation and use waste. And I will get this new chart. So if you were interested into transportation, you can see here how it emitted 8.43 gigatons last year. And you can also see what percentage of total emissions that is. And then again, every time you see a chart, if you scroll down, you can also see for each year what values they had, and you can download that information. So really, it's a quick way to check all our information on greenhouse gas emissions. This data is also available not only for the world, but you can do it also for any given country. So if you're interested in the United States, for example, you can select that, and these are the values for the country. You can compare multiple countries, and you can also download all the data that you see here by clicking in download current data CSV. There, it's a quick demonstration of some of the things you can do with Climate Watch. Now I'm gonna give it back to Tapan to continue with the Q&A session. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Leo. So I hope this has been informative both on what's happening in transport, what you can do with some of the tools that we have here. But yeah, I wanted to jump to a few questions that we've gotten in the chat. So actually one that I'm just gonna touch on briefly was someone was asking about whether or not data can be broken down at the national level on Systems Change Lab. So seeing particularly if we can search for a shift and seeing if it's on or off track for a particular country. So there's kind of two answers to this. One is that where we have it, we have tried to make country level data available in every instance that we can on the platform. One of the things we're still trying to do is make it easier to find that data. And so that's one of the features that we're exploring and hoping to release soon, soon maybe being this summer. is a feature for the grid view where you can actually filter down by which indicators have country level data, so that's easier to find and more available. That said, one thing we're not doing and don't have plans to do at this time is to provide assessments of whether or not a particular country is on or off track from reaching a target. There's a couple reasons for that. One is that assessing a country level target is a very different thing than saying what the global target is, because that requires us to say that a country has to have a certain target, which may not necessarily be aligned with their NDC, which you can read more about on Climate Watch. But also because then we start to get into, well, who has historic responsibility for doing what, what's fair. And so that's not something we try to cover when we do provide country level data. So we don't currently have plans to provide targets and assess whether or not a country is on track. But we do want to make sure at the very least that we can provide that country level data. Bryn, I'm running through some other questions in the chat that you think would be worth asking at this point.
Yeah, I can direct a question to Stephen that we received that's asking, how can we ensure that batteries for electric vehicles are sustainable in terms of resource exploitation and waste management? And does Systems Change Lab have any data on that?
Yeah, it's a really important topic. So I think one answer is we're seeing a lot of strategies emerging from different countries, national government strategies on critical minerals and on how we are sustainably managing the materials that go into these batteries. Also, we are seeing a lot of development. We've seen a lot of development over recent years from battery makers about developing alternative chemistries or new ways of creating these batteries that maybe will lean on different elements within those batteries. So particularly, I'm thinking about there's been quite an effort to reduce the amount of cobalt in lithium-ion batteries for several reasons, but a kind of major one being because there is a lot of concern over human rights abuses in the supply chain of cobalt, and that is actually something that we look at on the Systems Change Lab platform. We account one of our indicators is looking at the allegations of human rights abuses in mining. And so that appears both in the power system as well as the transport system because of its application to both of those places. In addition to that, I also just want to kind of promo, later this year, one of the systems that we will be releasing is about circular economy. And that is something that we're going to be really covering quite a bit in circular economy, that our circular economy experts have done a lot of great work on understanding recycling and material use and things like that. And so that is something that we'll have more on later, upcoming.
Thanks, Stephen. Another question for you. What are the key bottlenecks to decarbonization within each of the 5 key shifts?
So there are, quite a few. I think I think they kind of fit into these categories of cost is a major one. That is both, a lot of the time that is really about upfront capital costs. I think also, behavior is such a big, and like consumption is such a big issue here. And of course, like that's not evenly distributed. It's not like, we're blaming every single country and everyone for like, they just need to, stop taking cars or things like that. I think it's a lot more nuanced than that, which we get into a little bit on the platform. we get into a little bit in the State of Climate Action report as well. And I think it's also, policy and regulatory. I think we don't have as much policy support as we need, both in terms of scaling up new solutions, introducing new solutions, like bringing new solutions to market. But then also, in addition to that, the management of sales, as I mentioned, we're seeing more and more commitments from countries to phase out the sales of internal combustion engine vehicles. That's a useful tool. There's also kind of a complementary tool of a zero emission vehicle sales mandate, sort of the other side of that. Those are really useful tools. We're seeing more of them, but they're not quite as ubiquitous as we could hope to see them. So I think, I think really kind of thinking about our enabling condition categories, which is sort of how do you overcome those barriers? That's really about leadership by key change agents, which is really about target setting among countries, among companies, among campaigns, things like that. That behavior change that I mentioned, strong institutions, which is really about ensuring that we have our governments are, setting up the right institutions, maintaining the right institutions to be able to make these things change. There's quite a bit more. I would encourage you to look at the website and kind of explore those enabler categories, and I think there's quite a bit there that we can really work with.
Great. I think we have about time for one more question. So another question that's just come in, is there technology assessment comparing 100% battery EVs to plug-in hybrids that accept renewable fuel? And just noting that plug-in hybrid battery is about a tenth as large as a battery electric vehicle.
Yeah, so we do not, we don't have the expertise to conduct technology assessments in that sense, but there are quite a few. I'll give a shout out to a former employer of mine. The International Council on Clean Transportation does really phenomenal, really technical, really well-respected work on things like this. I think there are kind of a couple of different considerations in terms of electric vehicles and plug-in hybrids and things like that. We generally, as a systems change lab, prefer to assess and advocate for battery electric vehicles, but there can be a role for plug-in hybrids. I think one of the important considerations is really usage profiles. In the United States, I think about 60% of trips by car, plane, or rail, or transit are shorter than 5 miles. And I think it's about 78%, I think, is shorter than 10 miles. So there are, there are potentially usage cases where you can see a plug-in hybrid operating essentially as a battery electric vehicle that runs essentially entirely on its electric motor, but that these sorts of scenarios are not things that we have kind of particularly evaluated at Systems Change Lab.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Stephen. I want to thank everyone for joining. We're at time, but really appreciate all the great questions in the chat and folks for hopping on today. I hope this has been helpful and informative. Folks should also, feel free to reach out to us at our contact emails. If you have questions or things that we didn't get to answer today, we'd definitely be more than happy to try and address them. Once again, I want to thank everyone for joining us today, and hope you have a good rest of the day. Cheers.